What's up everyone, and welcome back to more Reddit stories about entitled people, insane people, and all that kind of stuff. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet for more Reddit content, and let's get into today's stories. Drinking on my doorstep? Get fired. Many years ago, I worked at an office in the city center just a couple of blocks from my rented apartment, so I often ate lunch at home. It was so nice being able to relax at home in the middle of the workday. Until summer came around. You see, there was a bar right next to the very narrow door from the building's stairwell out to the street, so occasionally I'd come home to find someone sitting on the doorstep, beer in hand, especially on weekends, but I'd just politely say, "Sorry bud, I need to get in here." And they'd invariably stand up and let me pass, usually saying, "Oh, sorry bud, back." Not a big problem in my life, in other words. But then one day I came home for lunch and there was a construction worker, around 50 years old, with high-vis vest and safety hat, sitting on the doorstep with a half-drunk beer in his hand. As always, I said my usual "sorry bud" phrase, but instead of standing up, this guy looked up at me with contempt, looked down again and didn't move. So I had to lean over him, unlock the door, and kind of half-squeeze past, half-step over him. When it was time to get back to work, the douche nozzle was still sat on the doorstep, with a fresh beer in his hand, and still refused to budge when I asked to pass. Same thing next day, except this time he mumbled, "Prick," when I asked to get past. I was now fuming. Day after day it was the same thing. This piece of crap ruined my otherwise perfect lunch routine, to the point that I didn't want to go home for lunch anymore. Sometimes he was sat there when I came home at the end of my workday. But then I got an idea. I took a longer lunch than usual, ate a sandwich on a bench diagonally across from my apartment, and watched him arrive at the bar, drink 3 beers on my doorstep, and when he got up to leave, I followed him to his workplace. And this is where I got really lucky. You see, he was working on a building that I knew pretty well, because I'm a structural engineer, and my colleagues were the structural engineers for that building project. Of course I didn't know this douchebag's name, but that wasn't a problem because the idiot had a goatee beard and a mullet haircut, which was pretty distinctive to say the least. So I went to my colleague's floor and asked them how well they got on with the site manager for that project. They replied, "Yeah, he's a good guy. Professional, meetings are always friendly." My eyes lit up. "Well, next time you're on site, can you tell him that it's come to your attention that one of his guys is drinking at least 2 beers every lunchtime at name of bar and returning to work drunk? Around 50 years old, brown hair, goatee, and a mullet." My colleague told me 3 days later that the site manager was fuming when he heard what they had to say. He knew immediately who the guy was and had zero tolerance for guys being under the influence on site, as they're a danger to others. So he followed him at lunchtime, saw him sitting at his usual spot on my doorstep with a beer, and as soon as the guy arrived back on site after lunch, he was fired on the spot. He made sure to do it in front of his other guys, so A, they would know not to be so stupid, and B, word would get out that this guy was an irresponsible drunk. Good luck with finding work in this town, f***wad. I taught a joker how it feels. A couple years ago, a job with housing fell through, so I was stuck in a strange town and state with no money or home. I got a job waitressing and a side gig at night cleaning and did all the hours I could. I was tired, dirty, and hungry for 3 months, until I found a person that needed a roommate. Things got better, and I even got a little cat that kept me company. Luckily, the town was near a tourist area, and enough folks got lost on the way to tourist places that the diner I worked at was busy. But Sundays were the worst. The locals on Sunday didn't tip, and without tips, I went hungry. One Sunday, a local family left a $100 tip, but the tip turned out to be fake, with the sermon on the back, and it was stamped with a local church name and address. I was salty. For over a year, that same family came in. I very gently tried to tell the man how disappointed I was when it wasn't a tip, but he said riches and God were better. He didn't ever tip at all for the whole time I was there. Then in September, a hurricane came through. The diner was flooded and closed. Since I didn't have a job anymore, I could go to church on Sunday if I wanted. I bought a lottery ticket and went to that church with a $100 sermon. The guy was there, and turns out he was the pastor. There was only about 30 people in the church, and it had lost part of the roof in the storm. The people seemed nice, and I knew them mostly from the diner, though I didn't know their names. I never went to church much since I was a little kid, so it was different. They took an offering and I put in my $2 lottery ticket. The next week, I went again, with the lottery ticket. The $100 pastor teased me that he had never gotten a lottery ticket in the basket before, and I told him he was getting another one. Maybe God would make him lucky. He thought it was funny. Then the next week, I took a fake lottery ticket in. My brother had given it to me and told me it was fake because he didn't want to hurt my feelings. I had held on to it because it was from him. I put that in the basket. The fourth week was the last week I was there. I got a job in Cincinnati and was going to drive up there that day. Folks at church knew because I had told them the week before and they were saying goodbye. The $100 pastor came up to me and really quietly scolded me before I left though. He told me it had been real hurtful to think he had won a lottery, enough to fix the roof, and then it turned out to be a joke. He told me I should think about it as I drive to my new job. I told him that now he knew how I felt when he gave me that fake 100 when I was sleeping in my car and hungry. I left and was happy about it the whole drive north. It's the best thing I ever did. Got a not really an HOA disbanded. After years of hearing stories of problems with homeowners associations and having no tolerance for busybodies ourselves, my wife and I were both solidly in agreement that we would never purchase a home in an HOA. When we finally did find a house and purchased it, we knew for a fact that we were not in an HOA. However, just behind us, we learned that there was a not really HOA. About a week after we moved in, there was a knock on the door. One of the neighbors behind us announced that she was president of the HOA and welcoming us to the neighborhood. Seemed civil enough, but we asked, "What HOA?" "Oh, we're behind you. The home behind yours is where the HOA starts." "Okay, that's nice. Nice to meet you." Just general pleasantries. We were hopeful. We were shocked even. Someone associated with the management of an HOA that wasn't a complete busybody psychopath. How wrong we were. The way our lot was, there was a sliver of green space between our property line and the sidewalk, in a somewhat triangular shape. The street ran west-southwest. Our property line ran due east-west, so there was a wedge of land there. We'd always been told that this belonged to the HOA, yada yada. No big deal. Just meant we didn't have to deal with the upkeep of this land. Now that the setup is all in place, it's time to start the story of how we got the not really an HOA dissolved. We had a couple of trees in our yard, literally on the property line, so we took responsibility of taking care of these things. They're massive. They're also a pain in the butt, incredibly dense and heavy, and because of the way the limbs grow, they're prone to splitting and dropping limbs. There was a huge limb that extended way out into the street, adjacent to the green space owned by the HOA. This thing was a major risk of dropping and severely injuring or killing someone. We didn't want that on our conscience, or our insurance, and so we decided to take that limb down entirely, as well as clean out a lot of the deadwood in the two trees. Hired an arborist. They came out, did their thing. $1,400 later, we were left with some decent-sized rounds that we were going to have to move over the next weekend. I was out of town the first weekend after we removed the limb. I should note that the wood was neatly stacked in the green space on the bark dust, out of everyone's way and in no way a hazard or eyesore. Enter the shrieking harpy, or president of the HOA. My wife had stepped out the door the day I left on my trip, and she pulls up into our driveway, rolls down the window, and starts yelling at my wife. "You need to move that wood now. That's private property of the HOA. Move it now." My wife is not a confrontational type. She's also somewhat petite and tried to explain to the harpy that I was out of town, and that we would be moving it as soon as I got back in town the next weekend. Nope, not good enough. She shrieks at my wife some more, and my wife ends up grabbing the wheelbarrow and somehow moves the stack of rounds, some of them weighed close to 100 pounds, around the fence, up our driveway and into the backyard. She was pissed. So was I. We knew where the harpy lived, so when I got back I went over to talk to her and explained that I was rather displeased in how she treated my wife. Didn't pound on the door, wasn't aggressive or anything. They wouldn't answer the door. Cowards. We knew they were home. This left us with a bit of a displeased taste in our mouth. The next spring, the hedge that is planted outside of our fence line, well, it wasn't maintained very well, and pushed over 2 sections of our wooden fence. So I emailed the harpy and explained that their hedge had damaged our fence. "It's not our hedge." It's growing in your green space." "That's not our green space." "Wait, what? Then why the censor did you screech at my wife last summer when we had the wood stacked there?" Silence. Well, at that point, I fixed the fence so our dog wouldn't escape, after pruning the hedge back sufficiently that it wouldn't damage the fence again, and started to make some phone calls. I contacted the county and ended up speaking to about 7 different departments in order to figure out who actually owned that strip of land. After probably 2 weeks of trying to find the right people to talk to, I got to the roads division. The green space was marked as part of the right-of-way for the road, and therefore no one actually owned that space. So I can chop down that ugly overgrown hedge that's encroaching on the sidewalk and knocking down my fence? Yep, says the kind gentleman from the roads division. As an aside, he asked, you mentioned something about there being an HOA associated with the plots to the east of your property? Yeah. Well, part of what took me so long to get an answer for you is that it turns out there is no HOA registered with the county there, so we were looking in the wrong place entirely. Wait, there's no HOA there? No, hasn't ever been one since that subdivision was built. Huh, interesting. And a plot was hatched. We had befriended a couple of people within the neighborhood behind us, and they were rather fed up with Miss President of the HOA and her antics. She was the typical busybody, bullying anyone she didn't like, and apparently, for the last 10 years or so, had been collecting HOA dues from everyone in the neighborhood to the tune of $300 a year. There were 36 homes in the HOA, right around $100,000 in dues for a non-existent HOA with no real maintenance. Oh, they hosted an annual block party, potluck style. They pulled weeds from the green space on a volunteer basis. So I did what any red-blooded American would do. I got 36 envelopes, 36 stamps, and printed off 36 copies of a letter with my findings from the county that there was not now nor ever had been for the recorded history of the subdivision any HOA, neighborhood association, or any similar organization, and that they collectively had paid in excess of $100,000 in dues over that time to a non-existent entity, plus any fines the non-existent HOA had decided to levy. The neighbors in turn did exactly what any red-blooded American would do. They sued the hell out of her for every penny they'd paid over the last 10 years. 1, too. And there's no longer an HOA behind us. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today. Thank you for watching, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more Reddit content like this. And also make sure to hit that like button as well. So I'm out of here. Have an awesome day everyone, and I'll see you next time.